Welcome. It is such a pleasure to welcome you all today and virtually to welcome Governor Robb and Linda Robb to UVA and to the Miller Center. We're going to talk today about his governor's terrific new memoir, In the Arena. And we're delighted and proud to do so in partnership with the publisher of that book, the University of Virginia Press. UVA and the Miller Center are both widely known for connections to presidents and the presidency. We're perhaps less known for our connections to governors, particularly governors of Virginia, but we've got a few of those too. First, of course, Thomas Jefferson served as governor during the Revolutionary War. He remains the Commonwealth's youngest governor. But the Miller Center was founded thanks in part to the hard work of a Republican governor, Linwood Holton, whose portrait hangs in the conference room next to my office at the center, and who I've had the pleasure of knowing for going on 30 years. My predecessor as director of the Miller Center was Governor Jerry Beliles, who many of you know passed away last year. And so we're delighted to host his predecessor, who after Jefferson was the second youngest governor in Virginia history. We're joined by his wife, Linda, whose father was President Lyndon Johnson, a major figure, obviously, in American history, and particularly at the Miller Center. Our presidential recordings program has been working for years on transcribing the secret Oval Office recordings of the Johnson administration, which we publish at the University of Virginia Press. In fact, later this year, in commemoration of the LBJ Library's 50th anniversary, we're working on a public exhibit that will allow people to listen to an even wider assortment of tapes for free than have been available in the past. Mrs. Robb continues to serve on the LBJ Foundation's board. Presumably, somewhere on those tapes are conversations President Johnson had either with or about those two guests. After all, they were famously married in the White House in 1967 in a very small 700-person ceremony and reception. Governor Robb tells that story and so many more in his new memoir. How he grew up in a post-war, post-Depression household, how he joined the Marines, finished first in his class at the grueling Marine Corps Officers Basic School, and worked as a young White House military aide. Of course, that is where he met his wife, Linda, now of nearly 55 years, who is the beating heart in this book. The book chronicles his time in Vietnam, through law school here at UVA, his service as lieutenant governor, and 2 terms as senator from the Commonwealth. He is the only senator to serve simultaneously on all 3 national security committees: Armed Services, Intelligence, and Foreign Affairs, Foreign Relations. The memoir also reveals a very human side of President Johnson, for which all of us at the Miller Center are grateful, seen through the eyes of his son-in-law. In that hugely important time period, the nation lived through a seemingly endless foreign war, through domestic turmoil at home, but including major progress on civil rights and civil justice. We have also lived through, during Governor Robb's time of public service, 4 presidential impeachments, transformations of both the Democratic and Republican parties, and major changes in the Commonwealth of Virginia and the nation at large. And Governor Robb's account is compelling and rigorous and also personal in its detail and moving in its remembrance. Governor and Mrs. Robb were clearly even partners in a life in politics and public service, from their courtship through the public and private choices they made in life, including where they lived, where they sent their kids to school, how they handled one public challenge or another. Mrs. Robb demonstrated behind-the-scenes leadership that she has also shown in a number of different public causes, ranging from libraries and literacy to women's rights to combating infant mortality. So this is really a virtual welcome home to a couple who have lived here in Charlottesville when Governor Robb attended law school here. To help me in walking through their shared history, I'm delighted to be joined by one of my most important partners at the Miller Center. Barbara Perry is the Gerald Beliles Professor here and the Director of Presidential Studies. She is the author of over a dozen books on the presidency, the courts, and American history. She has particular fondness for first families, having written about Rose Kennedy, Jackie Kennedy, and Senator Ted Kennedy, and now has a forthcoming book on the relationship between Eleanor Roosevelt and John Kennedy. She also has a forthcoming book on the presidency, Facing Constitutional Crossroads, which we will be featuring in a webinar on May 13th. So I'm going to turn this over to Barbara to get the conversation started, but I'll ask all of you in the audience to join us as well by sending us your questions in the Q&A function on your screen. Barbara and I will collect your questions, and we'll even pass notes to one another behind the scenes and try to get as many of our guests' questions into our two featured guests. So with that, Barbara, I hand it over to you.
Well, thank you, Bill, so much for that very kind introduction, and a big warm wahoo-wah to Governor and Mrs. Robb. Thank you for being here today, and a virtual welcome back to your one-time hometown of Charlottesville while the governor was in law school. And we know that one of your three daughters is a Cavalier alum. So a wahoo-wah to the Robb family. We're just delighted to have you with us today. And it is, as Bill said, given my background in studying the presidency and Congress and the courts and first ladies and presidents and American government in general, it's just a real honor and privilege to speak to both of you today. So I thought we would start with the governor's Marine Corps career. And I think that, first of all, I wanted to say to him and to Mrs. Robb, because I'm sure she played a major role in this book as well, not just as a character in it, but I'm sure in helping to write it. But Governor, you said in your acknowledgments in the book that your models for writing a memoir were Katharine Graham's Pulitzer Prize winning memoir, as well as Ben Bradley's memoir, both of which are favorites and on my bookshelf here in Charlottesville. And I just wanted to say you have succeeded. I found the book compelling, sprightly in its prose, and literally a page turner. And particularly your descriptions of your service in Vietnam. Wanted to thank you for that, in addition to your long service to our country and our Commonwealth, but particularly your service in Vietnam in combat. My brother is a Vietnam veteran, so I'm very aware that you veterans coming back from the Vietnam War were not always treated with the respect that you deserved. And so I found it just riveting to read those chapters of your time in the field. And I wondered if you could start with us today to talk about the lessons that you learned in the Marine Corps, the lessons that you could apply in your future political career, your future in combat, and as well as all of the work that you had to do in the Senate and beyond in the so-called endless wars that America became involved in the global war on terror. So how about if we start with your Marine career?
Well, let me just say that the Marine Corps has become a part of my DNA ever since Quantico. I start out with my experience in Quantico, which was when I was at the age of 21, between my junior and senior year in college. I was commissioned in the event at graduation in 1961, I guess it was, and immediately ordered to report to Quantico, where you go through another 6 months that all Marine Corps officers go through to give them additional opportunity to demonstrate whatever leadership skills that they're able to. How to communicate to the people that you have the privilege of commanding, if you happen to be a commanding officer, and you do tend to get rated on a regular basis by the instructor staff there and whatever, as well as all your peers. And the thing that was most meaningful for me, at least, was coming into an environment where we were all second lieutenants at that point, and you know that the quality of the folks that you're competing with, so to speak, is the kind of folks you want to be associated with, and a reputation that you want to live up to. And you work on how you develop respect with the people that you have been asked to lead. And you learn, I quote in the book, at least one sentence or whatever it is of Dwight Eisenhower. He said, you don't gain respect by hitting people over the head. You gain respect by gaining their trust. And I've always thought that that was an important element of the whole question of leadership. So if you've got the trust of the people who are going to put their lives on the line for you, and you're going to be putting your life on the line with them, you've got a whole lot better chance of actually accomplishing the mission that your country has sent you to do in a combat environment. You always depend on the man on your right, the man on your left, so to speak, to keep you from becoming a permanent casualty. In any event, you develop that kind of rapport, and you tend to bond with the people that you have the privilege of leading. And that just simply developed during the course of the instruction. That there's another element that goes to physical leadership. I couldn't at this point pass any of the kind of tests that were run back then, but I took great pride in making sure that I could max all of the physical training. I thought that I was indestructible and that I would never have to put up with all the conditions of the people that were considerably older. I thought that was their fate. They just didn't necessarily try to keep in shape, or they didn't try to do a lot of things that I thought that I could always do. Well, I found out that I was wrong. And in many other ways. Now that I'm in my 80s, I recognize that time is not necessarily your friend, and you have to cut down on some things that you used to do and think you could always do, and you develop a new normal.
Well, Governor, I will say, as somebody who's run over a dozen marathons, it was so striking when you described the basic school that you had to run with 40 pounds of gear in the summer, 3 miles at 6-minute miles. I'm not sure I've ever run a 6-minute mile. So my hat's off to you for that. That was truly staggering. When you came at, I'm sorry.
It is a challenge. And that's what's motivates you, is you realize that if you're going to, quote, max out, and I do address this in the book, that you're going to have to somehow, with all that gear bouncing up and down on you every step you take, through usually a course that is not just running on the highway or anything. It's challenging in and of itself. But that's what I liked about the Marine Corps. It was always a challenge, and they always took the position that if they could spend some time with you, they could make you into a Marine. And the signs at boot camp say, "We make Marines." One of them is in the process of making some changes at this point. But in any event, you built up that pride because of what everybody who had preceded you had done to bring that reputation to your benefit.
Chuck won't brag on himself, but I will. He was the first in his class. And when his mother came to see him graduate, she kept looking for his name. Where is his name? I know he graduated. And, she's looking at the graduation list. She can't find him. And that's because he was #1 in his class. And he was awarded the Mameluke Sword, which is a wonderful, beautiful thing that you don't know what you do with afterwards. But we have been fortunate enough to use it in the White House to cut our cake. And it worked great. And then we used it again for our 50th wedding anniversary to cut the cake. And it's a great symbol of what the Marine Corps is all about.
Incidentally, I just found that sword about 2 days ago that was in a closet. And I realized that it probably deserved better treatment than just being lost in a closet.
Well, I put it there.
Oh, you put it there.
Because it was in your dressing room, and it was just falling down all the time. And I wanted to make sure that we didn't lose it, because I'm going to use it for the 75th.
Yeah.
There's a very moving section in that period around Vietnam, Governor and Mrs. Robb, where you talk about your desire to serve in Vietnam. You've graduated at first in your class, And your reward is not what you wanted it to be, which was to go serve, but you're instead sent to Washington to be essentially an aide on display at various White House functions. There were probably other events. It had the benefit of introducing you to now Mrs. Robb, but you were still eager to serve, and that comes up in your courtship, including when you would be assigned to actually serve in Vietnam. Could you both talk about that a little bit? It's such a moving part of the book, and in particular, Mrs. Robb, I'd love to hear your thoughts about it, since we only get to hear the governor's thoughts in the book.
I'll defer to Linda in this case. The nice thing here is that Linda and I both knew that I wanted to go. I was determined to go, and I'd been getting a series of what most people would consider choice assignments. The Marine Corps, I think, probably figured that this was a way to reward me for how things had worked out in basic school. But in any event, I kept a lot of my classmates were able to go to Vietnam shortly after basic school, or in some cases, one other tour and then to Vietnam. Not everybody was coming back, either whole physically or mentally. And I wanted to prove to myself that I was worthy of the honor that I had been given by the Marine Corps at that point. There were any number of opportunities that I could have resigned my regular commission because I'd already fulfilled my duties. As a matter of fact, somebody who was in her father's administration, and I don't think he ever knew about this, but contacted me and said, you know, you have fulfilled your entire military obligation. You don't have to go to Vietnam. And this is in the book. I don't identify anybody. I've made a point of not remembering who might have given me advice that would have seemed to be contrary to the desires of the commander-in-chief. In any event, it was important to me to go. You basically make your bones with the muddy boots Marines. That's what we're trained for. And you have to prove that you can live up to your own expectations and the expectations of the Marine Corps and your country in an actual combat situation. And so it was critical to me that I do that. I couldn't even think of resigning my regular commission. I did it when I did finish my Vietnam tour. I came back and headed up the principal officer recruiting program for the Marine Corps. It's called the Platoon Leaders Class Program. But in any event, it's the same type of training that you go through at OCS. In fact, that training is conducted at OCS. And so I had an opportunity to go out and speak on behalf of the Marine Corps and service the country. And all of that gave me a certain sense of satisfaction that I could make a difference. And that encouraged me to continue on. And I wasn't willing to entertain any thought of leaving before I had completed my obligation to myself as much as anything else. And indeed, I made life a little more difficult for a fellow brother-in-law who was already safe in the Air Force Reserve. And the comparison suddenly gets very difficult. And instead of me not going, which would, in the judgment of many, would have made it easier on the commander-in-chief not to have a son-in-law over there that you have to worry about in addition to all the others. And he took a real interest in the number of people that were wounded and lost their lives on both sides of the equation. I mean, it wasn't just the US troops. He realized, as I came to realize even more fully, just how human many of the people that are fight on behalf of a different power are to ourselves. I mean, sometimes when you'd have, after a firefight, or even if you took prisoners, you would look through their documents. And in many cases, there were pictures of wives and children, just like we have.
Yep.
And I've taken a great deal of interest in the last few years in reading stories about people who were in a different circumstance altogether, in many cases, very different countries, but recognizing just how important it is that we look at fellow human beings as human beings.
So, Mrs. Robb, in that period of courtship, you're aware that your new fiance or soon to be announced fiance, you haven't announced the wedding yet, is planning to ship off to Vietnam. So now you've got to announce an engagement, plan a wedding, and then see your young new husband off to war. Tell us a little bit about that period.
Well, it was very difficult. Getting married is such an exciting thing and this great future ahead of you. But we had to understand that there's a chance that Chuck might not come back. And that's something that no bride wants to think about. And there's nothing romantic about that. But that's the way it was. And even to the point that we talked about, should we try to start a family? Because what if something happened? And where does that put me? And would it be better to leave behind a piece of Chuck with the new baby? Or would it be better for me to have been a widow and with no children or responsibility and to be able to go on with life? Because you have to be very realistic about what might happen when someone goes. Now, Chuck is the last son or son-in-law, member of the family of a presidential family to serve. Now, of course, Beau Biden has served more recently in wartime. His father wasn't president at the moment, but he was pretty close. And life is a very important issue for all of us. And my father would want to read my letters sometimes. And he would, he got a different,
unbeknownst to yours truly.
and he was a hard person to convince that his way wasn't exactly right. But there's a very famous photograph of Chuck, several in Vietnam, where he's actually in uniform and he looks so skinny and
there's a contrast coming up here.
Absolutely. Well, yes, I grew bigger and bigger. I stayed home and gestated. And as a matter of fact, he came home on Lucinda's 6th-month birthday, and he had never seen her and in person. Of course, I sent him lots of photographs, but he would write me. He purposely tried not to write me about things that he thought would upset me. And sometimes I did willingly share them with my father. And there's one very famous one where my father is listening to this tape that Chuck has sent to me. And he's just agonizing. He's in the cabinet room and he has his head in his hands. And I think he's sharing the agony of all the mothers and fathers and family members of people who are in wartime. And there's nothing you can do except pray and hope that your loved one is not in the wrong spot at the wrong time. Mm-hmm. And for instance, there was a letter Chuck wrote to me about taking a group of Amtraks out to help deliver food and things to people out in the boonies. And he was in the next Amtrak, but the one ahead of him hit an IUD and blew up, and he had men who were literally glued to their Amtrak. They caught on fire and there were people burning in front of him. And he called in the helicopters and he got all of his people off. And he knew that he was the one there to try to save their lives. And a lot of them didn't make it, but it was just luck. They were ahead of him. It could have equally been his Amtrak that hit it. And then there was another story that he wrote about how he heard an incoming and he dove into a foxhole and about 5 people jumped in on top of him. And he screamed the incoming and they all jumped in. And fortunately for them, the bomb actually, or whatever it was, the projectile hit very close to to the edge of the foxhole. And if it had gone just a little further, all of them would have been killed. So what you learn also is how important life is and how much of it is chance, and that you were not in that spot. And that was one of the things that we were consciously aware of. And never did I do as much praying. And I think that's the only way you can go. But I was so proud of him, and I just believed that he would come back safe. I think you have to do that. And I remember well when he came back, and I held out this little 6-month-old baby to him, and she looked at him like, "Who are you?" and it was a wonderful experience. But I knew that there was bounty on him, and they very much wanted, of course, to the Vietnamese, Viet Cong, wanted to capture him and have him somehow for ransom. And the Marine Corps really didn't want to have him out there as a company commander because he was so much at risk. But it was important to Chuck to push and force and make them, intimidate him, I guess, that's where he wanted to go, and he didn't want anything special. And this was his choice.
Can I follow up with a family question in along these lines, if I might? Governor Robb, you say in your book that Mrs. Robb is the best politician in the family.
No question.
And well, I'd like a little comment on that, both from you and Mrs. Robb, given that your father was president and your mother, Lady Bird, was a spectacular first lady, and I would put her in a category of top-notch politicians herself. Talk to us about that. What are the characteristics of a good politician, and talk about your family dynamic there, especially on the Johnson side?
Well, Chuck was not a very good politician. He did not understand.
But we were a team.
That's right. We were a team, and I didn't like politics. I had told him I hoped he wouldn't go into politics, and I had sworn I would never marry anybody in politics. But he was a career Marine. That's different. And so I just said, okay, I love you, and we'll try Vietnam instead. But anyway, we are a team. And I think that's an important thing, as my mother was a great team player for my father. And I knew that you needed to go around and meet people, let them know how much you really cared about their issues, and how you hoped that you would be able to fulfill their expectations. And I went to many, many, many places in Virginia. And with my daddy, I had gone to some around the country. And so I understood about politics and doing it on the ground. But Chuck, first, he doesn't ever brag on himself. He doesn't feel like, let me tell you what I've done and why I am such a good person and the best one to do your thing. And my children are better than he is. Each one of them wants the other one to go into politics. They just want to be their manager. But he's not. What he wanted to do is try to solve problems and to look at things with a big picture, not with, oh gosh, if I have to give up what I really believe because otherwise I can't get elected. And I could give you a long litany of times when he went out and in Virginia said things that were not popular. But he has the leadership skills. He knew that sometimes you needed to educate people about something and bring them along and hope that they will understand why you feel this way. And he then could go to bed at night and know that I did what I thought was right. And I didn't cave in to, oh my gosh, I'll never get elected if I tell the people in Virginia or the people in the Congress, this is the way I feel. And so he's not a good politician,
Yeah.
but he has been a great public servant. Now I'm prejudiced, of course.
Yeah.
But
Well, this is-
I'm,
you didn't mention, by the way, you didn't
I'm
mention.
pretty good at picking a life partner.
But Chuck, y'all didn't talk about another person who did a wonderful memoir, my mother. And I don't know, you see, again, he wasn't playing to the crowd. He should have said that to me, and I would have liked that, well, at least better than Ben Bradley.
You've answered a question from Elaine Middleman, which is that she would have loved to have heard about the role and importance of your mother, Mrs. Robb, as First Lady, and also of your role as First Lady of Virginia. But I'm going to ask Governor Robb to tell the story about how Mrs. Robb asked Mrs. Johnson to help out on the campaign. Do you know what I'm referring to, Governor? It was a great one-liner.
Yeah, it's a one-liner. When her mother was kind enough to come up and either volunteer to help with the campaigning, or even more importantly, to take care of our 3 little girls so that Linda could come out and spend a whole lot more time out helping people to understand what her husband is up to at this particular point. But there was a line in there. She was quoted, and I heard her say this once to her mother. Well, you can't, wait a minute. I can't paid for your husband. I want you to campaign for mine. And she did a
That was
great.
great.
Well, mother wasn't a natural campaigner either, but she studied up on doing public speaking and things and made herself. And she was a great influence. Nobody had more influence on my father than my mother. And as a historian, you'll know that 4 years before Daddy made that March 31st speech saying he wasn't going to run again, she had written that 4 years before and suggested that to him.
Wow.
And she did it within a few days of when, from 64 to 68, that she wrote this memo. And
I had not known that story, Mrs. Robb, until I heard you mention it just recently because of the new book that's just come out about your mother and her diary. And all of the tapes that she recorded and that have now become part of this book about her diary. And of course, as you said, she did a memoir of her time as First Lady. And then there's a wonderful oral history that she did for the Johnson Library, and a book that is based on that I was able to use as a model for my book on the oral history of Edward Kennedy. So anybody who wants to know more about your mother, there's so much out there to read, but that was a new story to me. I did not realize that your mother had made that not only prediction, but suggestion that your father remain in office for 4 years from 1964 on and then step aside. It was amazing.
All credit. He knows. He told me, you used to say, be just like your mother. She's the smartest person I know.
Mm-hmm.
And I listened to her. And one of the great tapes that Daddy did, one of the ones we like the best, is where he made the mistake of asking her to tell him how well he did in an event.
I know that. She's very sweet, but she's very pointed about her thoughts.
And
Better act together.
And my father used to grade everything. And so in that, she says, well, I would say, it's, I think probably a B plus maybe. And we all do that same thing. We will ask, our daughter, Lucinda, has written a book. And
she was the first one in print.
That's right.
Of the family.
Wonderful. I won't brag about her because this is not her story here today. But anyway, we have critiqued her on occasion, and I have been so brash as to say, now, Lucinda, the lighting wasn't good. And this is a Zoom because unfortunately, this book came out right in the middle of right before women's suffrage was to be celebrated. And she didn't get to do all the things. And she had done for the archives the 75th celebration. And now she had the opportunity to sell this book in a great time of celebration. And unfortunately, we had the pandemic, which of course was much more of an important issue than how many books she could sell. But if you want to learn later, I'll let you know about her book.
Governor and Mrs. Robb, so you become, you run for office yourself eventually, first lieutenant governor, and then governor. And you say that a governor is the highest honor, and you still prefer to be called governor as opposed to senator or any other position you held. Tell us about that role. It's only a 4-year term here in the Commonwealth. It's not a long time to get a lot of stuff done. So give us a little insight into why, of all the things you've done, that still is the
well, that
service title,
incidentally, was generated by one of my predecessors, and he published his own biographical memory or memoir with that as the title. And I just always thought that this was very close to how most of those who want to serve in that capacity feel that it ranks. And in truth, I'm really not a born legislator. I have great respect for those who excel in that. I know some very accomplished and dedicated people, but you never have you don't have the opportunity really to take complete control of what you want to accomplish. There's all kinds of trading. It goes both ways. This is just one party. Both parties, unfortunately, in the legislative process, more often than not, will craft amendments that very few would say much about it, but those are amendments that are designed to be very difficult for somebody on the other side, particularly in their next election against the person who's going to have to make some compromises to either say yes or no on one of these. It's not a way that I enjoyed playing the game. In any event, you do have a singular opportunity to make a difference as a governor or as a mayor of a city or as a president of the United States if you're going to seek that particular office. But it's important.
Let me ask, Governor, the foreword to your book is an effusive encomium, as my mentor here at UVA, Henry Abraham, Phil Abraham's dad would have said. It's really a great way to open the book. But you also include quite a bit about your partnership with President Clinton prior to his presidency, as you all worked on taking the Democratic Party in a slightly different vein in order to be a little bit more moderate and therefore to be more successful in running for the presidency. So I wondered if you might comment a little bit about your partnership with President Clinton and the Democratic Leadership Council. We've just been doing a series of interviews with President Clinton for his oral history with us. And of course, he talks quite a bit about that. But I wondered from your perspective, since you cover that so well in the book.
Well, let me just say that Bill had a credibility with the more activist and more left-leaning side of the political spectrum. And I thought it was terribly important that we get him involved. And I think he was reluctant at first because I don't think he wanted to lose the support of that group at the outset. And we've talked about it. And I had to talk to him 2 or 3 times to get him to say, yes, I'll be a part of it. And then we made him the next chairman. And that was the basis of most of the substantive part of his campaign.
Well, it's fascinating having watched that and both studying the history, knowing and understanding the changes in the Democratic Party, including here in the Commonwealth, where it was the segregationist party. And Mrs. Robb, how much your father changed that with the Civil Rights Act? No
question about it. And when Chuck became governor, there were several of his supporters still alive, Daddy's supporters, I mean, and they took a big risk. Hardaway Marks, for instance, was one of my favorites. And they were people who took big risks to be there and meet us at the train when we went to Richmond, because there were lots of places in the South that we went. And as you know, as you said earlier, Richmond had been the capital of the Confederacy. Yeah. And here we were going through in 1964 and saying, basically, we want you to hear our side of it and why we hope that you will vote for us, even though you didn't like some of the civil rights legislation that we have been urging with the people. And it is amazing how much support we had. It was, I bless those people for being there over that period from 64 to 81. And I know the chances that you take when you do that, particularly when you are in a legislature. And there was one person who told me that his own political career would never have gone like he wanted it. He never would have been elected if he hadn't supported Daddy in that election. And he didn't have that background before, but that helped him. and so it goes both ways. And we have been fortunate to be able to reach out to people across the party lines. I mean, if you ask Chuck, who, well, you can tell, who is the senator that you wanted to be like and you modeled?
Well, the first senator in Virginia was Bill Spong. I mean, he was not as charismatic as a whole lot of—
As Bill Clinton.
Or as Bill Clinton, for instance. That's right. But in terms of national politics, Scoop Jackson was much more my kind of Democrat, who was compassionate, but had a recognition that we had to be, that we had responsibility.
Diligent on the world scene, that we couldn't ever.
Yeah, he was able to balance both in a way that wasn't all personality. Again, Bill was almost a saint in many respects, but he was not flashy, and I like that.
Governor, I was really struck through the memoir at the size of your victories, both as lieutenant governor and governor. You're winning by pretty sizable margins as the first post-civil rights anti-segregation Democrat governor in Virginia. I think that's maybe the best way to describe it. The party's changing, the state's changing, but you're winning by big margins. Do you attribute that to your own military background? In the questions, I will say there are a number of Marines, some of whom may have been Marine colleagues of yours, that are lobbing questions in. Guy Larry Brown, Lieutenant Colonel USMC, retired 73, and others. I know the passion that the members of that fraternity feel, but in a Commonwealth that includes both Tidewater and the Pentagon, do you attribute part of your success to strong support from the military?
I think there's no question about the fact that I benefited enormously because I didn't have to prove that I was okay on all the national security issues in order to be taken seriously, because I've had that kind of service. But there are a couple of issues that people were very much surprised when I came out in favor of what I thought was the constitutionally correct way to address issues, like flag burning, among other things, and even being opposed to what, from my point of view, appeared to be very discriminatory language. I'm thinking of the Defense of Marriage Act and whatever the case may be.
And you know, let me tell you how that came about, or how I first saw it, is that when we were at UVA, and I say we were at UVA because I felt, I was part of several different organizations for law wives.
Yeah, that's right. She was the president of the Law Wives for a while.
I was involved in a whole bunch of, including environmental things. We started a big project on recycling, and we were talking about in 72, which was not the hottest thing on the burner. But anyway, it was what was I going for, y'all? This is what happened when you get to our ages.
Yeah, she's almost as old as I am at this point, and she's trying to recognize that what the difficulties I have are not necessarily to demonstrate any offense toward her. It's just what happens at a certain point in your progression. And one of the reasons that I like to have people that are in their prime in positions where you have to make major decisions. I think I made reference in the book to the fact that I realize at some point that I don't have that many sunrises. I've got more sunsets, whatever, I can't remember. It was one of Bill Clinton's favorite ways of saying it. But that I was at this point older than the last 5 or 6 presidents and the last, I think, 7 or 8 commandants of the Marine Corps, which for a Marine is the ultimate authority.
The Marine Corps was really his first wife.
That's right.
And I have been in contention ever since. I mean, if it comes between tomorrow, he's going to leave the house for the very first time, except for doctor's appointments in the last year, to go to a Marine event, not to take me out to dinner. That's all right. That's all right. I understand about that.
Semper Fi.
Semper Fi.
Semper Fi, there you go.
In our marriage vows, one of the things was, you will always stand for the Marine Corps hymn. That was one of his, I won't say obligations, but suggestions.
And at big Washington dinners, she stood out as she was standing with her husband to render respect for the Corps.
What I started to say before I got carried away with my other parts was that he was spending a summer in the Marine JAG, and he was reading through all of these reports about Marines and looking at should they proceed with their career in the Marine Corps or not. And he found that there were a lot of Marines who had served in war, who had been scarred, who had been decorated, that were going to be thrown out of the Marine Corps. Their love, I expect too, because they were suspected of being gay, not because of any action, not because they did anything that was against the Corps rules, but because they were suspected of being gay. And he when he was in a position in the Senate, he was the only Southerner to stand up, and he was a military person. And so he had credibility to say, I do not think that this will harm our Corps, our country, our military, to have people who love the United States and want to serve, but are gay. And it took a lot of courage. It wasn't the choice to win votes in Virginia. Now, I think we finally...
I did get a number of phone calls into my office, and I eventually went in and would relieve some of the interns or other people in the office who were answering the phone so that they wouldn't simply expire.
So there are a number of questions in the Q&A, both to Governor and Mrs. Robb, about civil rights issues. I think the day after the George Floyd decision, but then also Mrs. Robb thinking about the hugely important role your dad played in civil rights history in the United States. One of the questions is, what was one of the most important civil rights issues you worked on? And there's no doubt that homosexual rights are a form of civil rights. Are there others that come to mind, particularly having lived the long history going back to President Johnson's decision?
We want to think of using all the talent in this country. And we don't want to say, okay, you're a woman, so therefore you can't be the Secretary of Defense, or you're a woman, you can't to be in the high levels of the military. You don't want to discriminate and against any group of people like that could benefit this country, could make it a stronger place. To say, okay, you can't serve this government because you're Black. You can't vote in these places because we don't think your citizenship, is up. We only think that it should be male and white. And so I think those are some of the issues that we have come to look at. I think right now we're going through this. We're looking at discrimination against people, many colors or religions. And that's not our country. We have a background of asking everybody to serve our country. And so I think there are many civil rights issues that we are focusing on now too, and the equality of opportunity. And one of those qualities is to be able to serve. And so it's important that we use everybody's talents and we gather them all in. And that's one of the things Chuck did in Governor's Mansion. And I'm prejudiced, of course, but he tried to open Virginia government to people who hadn't been serving before, women in high positions, people of color. He wanted, and he ran we looked at disabilities before we had the national program, trying to see how we could gather the talents of people who in some way, at least at that time, we felt were not being utilized. So these are all civil rights issues of a time. Now, Chuck, you can talk.
Well, I was just going to say, one of the advantages, and this goes to the whole question of white privilege. It's not white whatever that suggests that you ought to have it. I mean, the fact that I was born white, male, straight, and probably a Christian saved me from the difficulty that many people have to find a way to convince others, if in the political process particularly, that they're worthy of their trust and they could cast their lot with them. I didn't have to fight all those battles, and I realized I'd had it easy because I didn't have to automatically start out with a defense of who I was.
I'm thinking back to, again, Bill Clinton, and I went to the funeral of Justice William Brennan when he passed away in the 1990s. And Bill Clinton, as president, then gave a eulogy. And he actually made a little joke about the role of the media and the fact that Justice Brennan had written the opinion in New York Times versus Sullivan from 1964, which pretty much allows the media to say whatever they want about public officials. And so you both have
over that for a number of years.
You've both endured the slings and arrows of media criticism in both of your families. And so I wondered, how did you deal with that, and any thoughts about where we are now, particularly with social media?
Well, let me say that I think that the vast majority of the people who are involved in the whole journalistic process, media writ large, are very capable, honest folks who want to try to present the story as they see it to be true. And it's, I regret the fact, and I talk about this a little bit in the book, that we've developed a sort of a tribal warfare. And everybody just automatically assumes that somebody who's writing for a particular or on air for a particular publication is either right, left, or someplace else. And we're not always going to consider exactly what the issue is and what's important and what we could do to make it better if that's the case. The complete lack of trust, credibility that has developed around what is presented by those who are the media has been very destructive. And there are way too many people that if something is simply flat out wrong, and if it's repeated often enough, they will believe at some point that it must be a fact. And those who are taking positions that fall into that category can benefit enormously by just making sure their view or whatever they're saying is repeated often enough. And those of us who have an opportunity like to take issue with that approach and stand up for the people who do it and try to get to the bottom. And that doesn't mean that, going back to Thomas V. Sullivan, the case, that was always frustrating. My first few years in politics, when something was written that I didn't agree with, whatever the case may be, and I wanted to take issue, and then I would read that case again. I was going to say, there is no special privilege that I have that I can make the case. And in most cases, You simply trust the process and the people who are dedicated to making sure that all the facts are known and that those things will sort themselves out in a way that reflects justice. Hopefully that's what we just achieved in Minnesota.
So I'd like to ask one more question before we bring this to a close. We're approaching what has been a terrific hour from my perspective. And you've both followed world affairs from your courtship forward. We're in such a new and different world now. I'm just curious, as you look around the world, having served on those three really important committees, what draws your attention in world affairs? Lauren Hershey asked, if you were going to serve as ambassador in the Biden administration, where would you go? But I think more generally, just your insights and wisdom on the big challenges of facing America in the world today. I just love a minute or so from both of you of what you pay attention to outside our borders.
Well, you look at the big international relationship, particularly the major power centers and what they have the capability of doing, and have to continue to be ready to take on whatever initiatives might be thrown at you in a way that is constructive and just doesn't resort solely to force. But you always have to have the ability and the credibility in talking about the alternatives to be able to carry out whatever policy that you're promoting, or that you're in opposition to those who take a different position on some of those issues. But I guess if there's one central point that I've been frustrated, the fact that so much of it has turned into pure politicization in terms of demeaning the person who has a particular point of view. I never considered the people in the political process who took contrary views to be my enemy. I recognize that they were simply a challenge to provide them with enough positive information about why whatever I might be espousing at that time was a good policy choice. But don't just tear into somebody who may be human and expect that the politics of that kind of demonization are going to succeed.
Well, Governor and Mrs. Robb, thank you both so much. A number of the questioners have mentioned the fact that when you were both in law school here, Governor, you served as the head of the law school forum, bringing in great speakers. And we still partner with the law school on a regular basis on a number of things. When we all get back to in real life, we would love to have you down in person for a homecoming here. But let me thank you. And in doing that, I want to bring on Suzanne Mumma, who is the publisher in chief of the UVA Press, to give us closing remarks. But on behalf of the Miller Center and on behalf of Barbara in particular, I want to thank you both for spending an hour with us and for sharing this wonderful book. So Suzanne, over to you.
Thank you, Bill. Our appreciation to all of you for being here, to the panelists, and to the Miller Center for hosting this wonderful event this afternoon. But a special word of thanks goes to our author. Governor Robb, it was a great honor for UVA Press to publish in the arena. You have shown us through this book, in this time of enormous national challenges, that courage, conviction, and I would say love changes the game.
Yeah.
So we're indebted to you. We thank you all for being here. And thanks again to Bill and Barbara and all their colleagues at the Miller Center.
Suzanne,
Great.
thank you.
Thank you.
It's just
Have a nice evening. Thank you so much. Safe travels.